U.S.-Vietnam trade deal and tariff impacts.
Welcome, curious learners. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something really significant that's unfolding globally, the recent U.S.-Vietnam trade deal. And this isn't just, tweaking some numbers on tariffs. It feels like a strategic moment, already starting to redefine supply chains and, well, international relations.
Absolutely. It builds on decades of change between the two countries.
Exactly. So we're going to try and unpack the specifics of the agreement, look at some maybe surprising impacts across different sectors, and figure out what it really means for you, for businesses, and the wider geopolitical scene.
Right.
So maybe start us off. What are the core pieces of this new deal?
Well, okay, so the announcement came from President Trump on July 2nd, 2025. And it really boils down to three main things. First, a 20% tariff on Vietnamese imports coming into the U.S.
Okay.
Then second, this is a big one, a 40% duty on goods that are considered transshipped from other countries. It's really aimed squarely at Chinese products being, routed through Vietnam.
Right, that tariff tourism idea.
Precisely. And then the third part, the trade-off, is Vietnam committing to remove all its import tariffs on U.S. goods.
Okay, that's quite a package. Let's break down those numbers a bit. That 20% tariff, it's lower than the 36% that was threatened back in April, right?
It is, yeah. And some reports said Chinese firms operating in Vietnam felt, well, maybe that 20% was manageable compared to 46.
But still, it's double the 10% that was actually in place just before this deal.
Exactly. It's still a significant hike. And then there's that 40% transshipment penalty you mentioned.
Yeah. How does that even work? How do you identify transshipped goods?
Well, that's the tricky part. There's a lot of ambiguity. Our sources suggest it's causing real concern because the threshold might be incredibly low. Like maybe even just 1% Chinese content could trigger that massive 40% tariff.
Wow. 1%. That sounds like a nightmare for companies trying to prove origin at customs.
It really does. It creates a huge compliance burden. And, beyond the immediate tariff costs, this deal really pushes to reshape global manufacturing. Well, think about it. It means higher costs for anyone importing from Vietnam into the U.S. and intense pressure, especially on Vietnamese industries that rely heavily on imported materials from China, textiles, garments, electronics.
Right, the big ones.
Yeah. Companies like Apple, Samsung, they have huge operations in Vietnam. They might now face serious pressure to either localize production, more find Vietnamese suppliers, or shift their sourcing away from China entirely.
So it's pushing Vietnam further up the value chain almost.
In a way, yes. It aligns with Vietnam's longer-term goals, but under, let's say, considerable external pressure.
And the scale here is just mind-boggling. Vietnam exported something like, $137 billion to the U.S. just last year in 2024.
That's right, a massive figure.
So our sources are saying these tariffs could, long-term, maybe cut 25% of those exports. That's a huge hit, potentially over 2% of Vietnam's entire GDP.
It's a significant risk for them, absolutely. Yeah. But on the flip side, the deal does create these major openings for American businesses.
Because Vietnam's dropping all its tariffs on U.S. goods.
Exactly. So think about U.S. sectors like automotive, heavy machinery, industrial equipment, companies like Ford, Caterpillar. They suddenly get tariff-free access into this really fast-growing Southeast Asian market.
So it's less like a small adjustment and more like a tectonic plate shift in trade flows.
That's a good way to put it. And connecting this to the bigger picture, it really throws Vietnam's delicate strategic position into sharp relief.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Well, Vietnam, it really values its growing ties with the U.S. It sees Washington as a sort of counterweight against its anxieties about China.
Which is its giant neighbor, a perennial threat in their view, but also their biggest trading partner.
Precisely. And critically, the source of so many essential inputs for its manufacturing. So there's a very real risk that Beijing might retaliate against this deal, maybe restrict crucial raw materials, maybe impose its own tariffs, squeezing Vietnam from the other side.
That really raises the core question then. How does Vietnam keep balancing these vital but sometimes conflicting relationships with both the U.S. and China, especially now?
It's an incredibly tough balancing act. Internally, Vietnam's trying to build resilience. They're pushing diversification, using other free trade deals they have. They're investing in big infrastructure projects, new rail links to China, and even Europe, trying to improve logistics.
But aren't they also dealing with internal challenges? I remember reading about an anti-corruption campaign causing slowdowns.
Yes, that's a major factor. While the anti-corruption drive is seen as necessary long-term, it has reportedly led to a kind of bureaucratic paralysis. Decision-making on crucial projects like those infrastructure upgrades can get bogged down.
So they're walking this tightrope, trying to upgrade and diversify while navigating internal bottlenecks and these huge external pressures from the U.S. and China.
That sums it up pretty well. It's complex.
So when we step back, what's the kind of ultimate takeaway from this U.S.-Vietnam deal? It feels like much more than just economics.
Oh, definitely. It's fundamentally a strategic move playing out on this rapidly changing global stage. It seems aimed at, well, curbing China's economic influence while maybe trying to create a more stable, albeit different, trade footing.
It really sets the stage for a new kind of order, doesn't it? Though maybe a fragile one.
Exactly. Fragile is a good word. The real test isn't just the ink on the agreement. It's about the execution, how these two nations and, frankly, global businesses caught in the middle actually navigate this, how it truly reshapes those supply chains and international ties way beyond just Washington and Hanoi.
It feels like this isn't an endpoint at all.
Not at all. It's really just the start of a pretty profound realignment, I think. Lots to watch moving forward.